They told me I was nothing more than a burden. They laughed as I stood on that stage, thinking I had nothing to show. But when I opened the envelope and placed that letter in my father's hand, the entire hall gasped. My so-called useless life was suddenly worth $12 million. From the very beginning, Lenny's life felt like a mistake in the eyes of her parents. When she was born, there was no celebration, no joy, only the heavy sighs of disappointment. She grew up wearing clothes that had already been worn and torn by others. Her shoes were always too big or too small, stitched again and again, while her brother Teru got brand new ones for every school year. At home, her name was rarely spoken with pride. If she brought home a good grade, no one looked at her twice, but when Teru scored even half of what she did, the house echoed with praises and laughter. Lenny learned early that love in her family had rules, and she did not fit them. She used to sit quietly at the corner of the room, listening as her parents spoke with shining eyes about Teru's future, how great he would become, how much he would bring honor to their name. When her turn came, when she dared to whisper her own dreams of becoming someone important, her father would look at her with a smirk. You'll never achieve anything, he said again and again, until the words pressed into her heart like iron. Each time, she nodded quietly, swallowing her pain, but inside something was burning. Her mother treated her like an extra load in the house, always reminding her that she was eating food she didn't deserve, taking space that could have belonged to someone useful. You are nothing but a burden, she often repeated, and the words became a shadow that followed Lenny everywhere she went. She never asked for much, but even the little she wished for, like a new notebook, a pencil, or money to go for school projects, was denied. Yet when Teru asked, the answer was always yes. Still Lenny did not fight them. She stayed silent, carrying her pain alone, but her silence was not weakness. Deep inside, every harsh word became fuel. Every rejection planted a small fire in her chest that told her she had to prove them wrong. She cried sometimes when no one could see, but after the tears dried, she went back to her books. She worked harder than anyone because she knew nobody believed in her. She dreamed, not because anyone encouraged her, but because she wanted to show that even the daughter they never wanted could rise above the walls they built around her. And though they could not see it, she was already stronger than they ever imagined. Every night, when the house grew quiet and everyone else was asleep, Lenny would sit in the corner of her small room with nothing but a kerosene lamp flickering beside her. The light was weak, barely enough to see the words on her books, yet she forced her tired eyes to stay open. She had no desk, only the cold floor, and sometimes the smoke from the lamp stung her eyes until they watered. Her parents refused to buy her a proper lamp or even the books she needed. They said it was a waste, that she would never amount to anything. But Lenny refused to stop. She told herself that every page she turned was a step away from the life they tried to cage her in. When her younger brother Teru asked for something, the family always found a way to provide it. If he needed money for school trips or projects, her father would dig into his pockets without complaint. If he wanted extra lessons, her mother would gladly pay. But when Lenny asked for the same, they laughed at her. Her father's voice would rise, sharp and cold, telling her she was wasting their resources. Why should we spend on you, he would say. You will never bring us anything back. Those words cut her every time. But she learned not to argue. Instead, she quietly borrowed old books from friends or used scraps of paper to practice her writing. She carried the weight of being unwanted, yet she never let it crush her spirit completely. Her mother's words were the heaviest burden of all. Again and again, she told Lenny she was nothing but a burden, a mistake they had to carry. Sometimes those words echoed so loudly in Lenny's head that she almost believed them. She would sit with her books, staring at the pages, and wonder if maybe they were right. Tears would roll down her cheeks in the darkness, but she always wiped them away quickly. She didn't want anyone to see her cry, not even herself. She knew that if she gave up, their words would win. So she hid her pain behind silence. In school, she smiled faintly, pretending nothing was wrong, while inside she carried a storm. When classmates complained about small struggles, she kept quiet, knowing they could never understand the battles she fought at home. Every cruel word, every denied request, every night spent under that dim lamp became part of her strength. She poured her pain into her studies, reading until her head ached, writing until her hands cramped. She told herself that one day, All the nights in the shadows would be worth it. One day, the world would see the girl her parents chose not to see. And in that belief, she found the courage to keep going, even when love and support were nowhere to be found. Lenny knew that if she ever wanted to change her life, she could not wait for her parents to believe in her. They never would. So while they dismissed her as hopeless, she began working on something they would never imagine. At night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, she pulled out scraps of paper and old notebooks, writing until her hands ached. She searched for scholarships in secret, collecting information wherever she could. She didn't have her own phone or computer, so she went to a neighbor's house and used their internet whenever she could sneak away. Every minute online was precious, and she would quickly copy details into her notebook before anyone noticed. She hid those notes under her mattress, guarding them as if they were treasure. When she discovered how many essays and forms were required, she did not give up. She stayed up under her dim lamp, writing page after page, pouring her soul into every line. She had no expensive pen, no proper paper, but what she did have was determination. Each essay was like a piece of her heart, telling strangers across the world who she was and why she mattered. Sometimes, when her lamp went out, she kept writing in the dark until her hand touched the edge of the paper. She refused to stop, because she knew this was her only chance. Sending out the applications was even harder. She had no money for postage, but she found ways. She borrowed stamps from kind neighbors who didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes she walked for miles to drop letters at the post office, clutching them tightly as if her whole life depended on them. Because it did. No one in her family knew what she was doing. If they found out, they would have laughed at her, maybe even torn her papers apart. So she kept her secret close, holding on to hope in silence. One day, she came across a program that felt impossible. It was an international scholarship, one that promised to change the life of whoever won it. The benefits were more than she had ever dreamed. Full tuition, housing, travel, and money for research. But it also came with the harsh truth that only 1 in a million students would ever be chosen. For a moment, Lenny felt her heart sink. The chances were so small, the mountain so high. But then she thought of her father's words, the ones that cut her every day. You'll never achieve anything. And in that moment, she refused to accept their judgment as her destiny. She filled the form with steady hands, wrote her essay with more passion than ever before, and sealed the envelope like it carried her future. Before mailing it, she whispered to herself, "I will prove them wrong." That whisper wasn't just a promise. It was her fight against years of rejection. Even if the world doubted her, she believed. And sometimes, belief is the strongest beginning. Graduation day was supposed to be a day of joy, a day when every student felt proud to walk across the stage and see their family smiling back at them. The school hall was filled with laughter, cameras flashing, and parents cheering loudly for their children. But for Lenny, it was different. She walked into the hall with her parents trailing behind, their faces blank, as if they were attending a chore instead of celebrating their daughter. On the way there, in the parking lot, her father had leaned closer and muttered, "We wasted money raising you. You're nothing but a burden." Those words pierced her heart like knives, but she bit her lip and said nothing. She carried them silently as she adjusted the old gown on her shoulders and looked down at her worn shoes, the same pair she had polished again and again to survive the years. When her name was finally called, the applause in the hall grew. Students clapped, teachers smiled, but in the row where her parents sat, there was almost no sound. Her father gave a stiff, half-hearted clap, while her mother folded her arms and looked away, as though ashamed to be there. Lenny lifted her chin high and walked across the stage, though her steps were heavy. Every cheer for the other students echoed in her ears, reminding her of what she did not have, a family who believed in her. She accepted her certificate with trembling hands, forcing a smile, but inside her chest, her father's words burned like fire. She looked out into the crowd, watching mothers crying proudly for their children and fathers waving joyfully at sons and daughters. She saw siblings holding bouquets of flowers, rushing to embrace their graduates. And then she looked at her own family, still seated, still cold, still refusing to celebrate her. It felt as if she was invisible to them, as if nothing she did mattered. For a brief moment, she wanted to cry, but she reminded herself that today was not only about them. Today was also about the secret she carried, In her bag was an envelope, carefully folded, sealed with a future they could not imagine. That envelope held the answer to every insult, every dismissal, every night of pain she endured. Her parents thought she had nothing to show, that she was a waste of space and money. But what they did not know was that inside that bag was a letter powerful enough to silence every cruel word they had ever spoken. So as she walked back to her seat, she held her head a little higher. She let them think she was small, useless, a mistake, because soon, very soon, the truth inside that envelope would come to light. And when it did, the same parents who had called her a burden would be forced to see the daughter they had rejected standing taller than they ever imagined. The graduation ceremony was almost over, and everyone was already gathering their things, ready to leave. Then the dean of the university walked to the podium. His steps were calm, his smile warm, and the hall slowly grew quiet as his presence commanded attention. He looked over the crowd, scanning the parents and the students, letting the silence settle. Then he spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Before we end today's ceremony," he began, "there is one more honor that must be given. Today we recognize a student who has not only brought glory to this institution, but also to our entire nation." The words immediately caught everyone's attention. Murmurs spread through the audience like a wave. Parents leaned forward in their seats, curious and excited, each hoping it was their child being spoken about. Students turned to one another, whispering guesses, some already clapping for whoever the lucky person might be. The air was filled with anticipation, the kind that makes hearts beat faster. Lenny sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breath. She knew what was coming, but she did not move. She kept her face calm, though inside her chest her heart was racing. For years, she had been invisible to the very people now waiting to hear the dean's words. And in just a moment, everything would change. The dean paused, letting the suspense grow, and then spoke again, louder this time. "This year the honor goes to none other than Lenny Oba." The hall erupted instantly. Applause thundered through the air, echoing off the walls, louder than it had been for any other student. Students jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering, while teachers smiled with pride. Some parents gasped in shock, looking around as if they had misheard. The name was clear, repeated again and again in the applause, Lenny Oba. Lenny stood slowly, her legs trembling, and for the first time in her life, the spotlight belonged to her. She looked out into the crowd and saw faces glowing with admiration, people who had overlooked her now clapping until their hands turned red. But what caught her eye most was her parents. They sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide, their faces pale, as if the floor had just been pulled from under them. Her father's hand, which had earlier clapped lazily for her, now gripped the armrest tightly. Her mother's lips parted, but no words came out. They had called her useless, a burden, a waste, and now their daughter's name was being celebrated before the entire hall. For the first time, silence came from them. Not the silence of neglect, but the silence of shock. And that silence was louder than any insult they had ever thrown her way. The dean's voice echoed through the hall as he called Lenny to the podium. For a moment, she could barely move. Her legs felt weak, her hands shook, and her heart pounded in her chest. Slowly, she rose from her seat, every pair of eyes following her as she walked down the aisle. She had always been the girl who was ignored, the one nobody expected anything from. But now, with each step, the air grew heavier with anticipation. When she reached the stage, the dean smiled warmly at her and gestured for her to stand beside him. With trembling fingers, Lenny reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope she had kept hidden for weeks. The white paper seemed to shine under the bright lights of the hall, the golden seal glimmering as if it carried her destiny inside it. She held it close to her chest for a moment, taking in the weight of what it meant. This was more than a letter. This was proof of every sleepless night, every tear she wiped away, every cruel word she had endured in silence. The dean carefully took the letter, opened it, and began to read aloud. "We are proud to announce," he said, his voice steady, "that Lenny Oba has been awarded a full international scholarship valued at $12 million. Gasps filled the air instantly. Some parents put their hands over their mouths in shock. Students turned in their seats, whispering her name, unable to believe that the quiet girl who once had nothing was now being honored in such a way. The dean continued, his voice ringing with pride. This scholarship covers tuition, research, housing, and stipends for international study. It is one of the most competitive awards in the world, and Lenny has won it. The hall erupted in applause, louder than anything Lenny had ever heard. Teachers who once ignored her clapped the hardest, their faces glowing with pride, as if they had always supported her. Classmates who had never noticed her stood on their feet, cheering her name, their eyes wide with admiration. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was seen, celebrated, and lifted higher than she had ever dreamed. But the moment that mattered most was not the applause of strangers. It was what came next. Lenny took the letter from the dean and turned to face the crowd. Her eyes searched for the two faces that had caused her the deepest pain. Her parents. She walked down the steps of the stage, the applause still shaking the hall, and moved straight toward them. Her father sat stiff, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on her in disbelief. Without a word, Lenny placed the letter gently in his hand. He looked down at it, his fingers trembling as he read the words he never thought he would see. And in that instant, the label of burden vanished. The daughter he had rejected was now the daughter the whole world applauded. The hall was still ringing with applause when Lenny turned and looked at her parents. For the first time in her life, she saw them without words. They did not clap. They did not smile. They did not even move. Her mother's lips trembled as though she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Her father, the man who always walked with proud shoulders and spoke with a voice full of authority, sat slumped in his chair like the weight of the world had just been placed on him. The man who had told her again and again that she would never achieve anything now stared at the paper in his hand, the letter that proved how wrong he had been. Teru sat beside them, his mouth hanging open. He had always been the golden child, the one praised for every small thing, the one everyone believed would make the family proud. Yet now he looked at his sister in disbelief, as though she had transformed into someone unrecognizable. He remembered every time he had called her useless, every time he mocked her for being quiet, every time he laughed when their parents dismissed her dreams. Now the sister he had treated like nothing stood higher than he could ever imagine, holding an honor he could never reach. The silence from their row in the hall was heavier than the loudest applause. All around them, people were cheering, clapping, even shouting Lenny's name, but her parents sat frozen, pale, and defeated. Her father's lips pressed together, but the words he had repeated for years, "You're a burden," no longer had strength. They turned into ash in his throat, useless against the truth in his hands. His daughter, the one he never believed in, was the one the world was celebrating. Lenny watched them closely, her chest rising with a mix of emotions she could not describe. Part of her had always longed for their approval, for even a single word of pride. But in this moment, seeing their silence, she understood that she no longer needed it. Their silence was her victory. Their shock was her freedom. She did not need their applause because the world had already given it to her. Her mother's hands shook as she tried to reach for the letter, as if touching it would make the truth easier to accept. But her eyes betrayed her, full of regret, full of shame, full of the realization that they had wasted years pushing away the very child who had brought them glory. Teru kept staring, his pride crumbling piece by piece, unable to understand how everything had shifted in just a single moment. For Lenny, that silence said everything she had ever wanted to hear. It was louder than any praise they could give, because it meant they finally knew the truth. She was never a burden. She was the blessing they had failed to see. Reporters hurried to the front, microphones in their hands, their voices overlapping as they tried to get Lenny's attention. Camera flashes lit up the hall like stars, each one capturing the moment that would soon be shared everywhere. Professors who had once passed her by without a second glance now rushed to shake her hand, their smiles wide, their voices full of praise. Students who used to whisper behind her back now pushed forward, asking for pictures, shouting her name like she was a celebrity. The air was filled with excitement, with chants of Lenny, Lenny, echoing from every corner of the hall. She had become more than a student. She had become a symbol of hope and pride. But in the middle of all that noise, there was one corner where silence ruled. Her parents sat stiff, their eyes fixed on her but their bodies frozen as if the ground beneath them had turned to stone. They had no words, no claps, no smiles. The same parents who had once said she was worthless were now watching the entire world celebrate the very child they had rejected. Every cheer from the crowd felt like a reminder of their cruelty. Every camera flash was like a light exposing their shame. They were no longer her proud family. They were simply two strangers in a crowd that no longer cared about them. For Lenny, the moment was both powerful and painful. She stood tall, holding her letter close to her heart, but she didn't look at them again. She didn't need their approval anymore. Their silence didn't break her. It only proved how wrong they had been. She was no longer just their daughter, trapped under their shadow. She was something bigger now, someone the whole world wanted to honor. She was a daughter of the nation, a daughter of the world. Her name was no longer tied to their rejection, but to her strength, her brilliance, and her story of survival. The hall roared louder as reporters shouted questions about her plans, about where she would study, about how she felt. Lenny answered with calm confidence, her voice steady, her words humble but strong. Each response made her shine brighter, and the crowd admired her even more. People saw her not as the girl from a broken home, but as proof that diamonds could shine even if buried deep in mud, ignored, and stepped on. She was living proof that no one could stop a determined soul from rising. As the chants of her name filled the air again, Lenny knew one truth: she didn't need the love of her parents to feel whole anymore. She had found something greater, the respect of the world, and the pride of a nation. And in that moment, she understood that sometimes, family can fail you, but destiny never will. When the ceremony ended and the crowd slowly began to leave, Lenny's father moved quickly toward her. His voice was shaky, not proud, but desperate. He muttered words that sounded like excuses, saying he had only been strict with her for her own good, that he wanted her to be strong. But his words felt empty, like paper trying to cover fire. Her mother reached out next, her eyes glistening as if with tears of joy, but Lenny knew those tears came too late. For years she had begged for one kind word, one gentle touch, one moment of love. Now, after the world had seen her worth, they suddenly remembered she was their daughter. Lenny stood still, her heart beating calmly, not with anger but with clarity. She pulled her hand back before her mother could hold it. She looked at them, two people who had given her life but never given her love, and her voice came out steady, stronger than it had ever been. "You called me a burden," she said softly, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. "But today, I carried the weight alone. And I will carry it without you." Her father's proud shoulders, the same ones that had always looked down on her, suddenly sank. His face crumbled as if the strength he had once worn like a mask was gone. Her mother's trembling lips parted, but no words came. For years, they had spoken over her, silenced her, crushed her spirit with their favoritism toward Teru. Now, it was their turn to feel what silence meant, the silence of being cut out from her heart. Lenny did not shout. She did not cry. She did not beg them to understand. She only stood with the calm dignity of someone who had fought battles no one helped her fight and finally won. Around them, the echoes of her name still lingered in the air from the applause that had filled the hall. Professors, students, reporters, they had all seen her, valued her, celebrated her. But her parents, who should have been the first to recognize her light, were the last to see it. And now it was too late. For the first time in her life, Lenny did not feel the need to prove herself to them. She did not need their praise, their approval, even their love. The little girl who once longed for their embrace was gone. Standing in her place was a woman who had learned that true strength does not come from being accepted by family, but from accepting yourself when no one else will. As she turned and walked away, leaving her parents frozen behind her, Lenny's steps felt lighter than ever. She was free, not because they had finally tried to claim her, but because she no longer needed them at all. The doors of the hall opened, and a soft breeze touched her face as if the world itself was welcoming her. The golden rays of the sun fell on her skin, warm and gentle, almost like an embrace she had been waiting for all her life. Lenny paused for a second, not to look back, but to feel the freedom in front of her. Behind her sat the people who once called her worthless, the people who never believed in her. But she did not turn. She knew there was nothing for her in the past, no love, no comfort, no pride. Ahead of her stretched a road she had carved with her own strength, a future waiting to be claimed. Her steps were steady, each one louder in her heart than the applause that still echoed behind her. She no longer needed their validation nor their acceptance. Every tear she had once shed, Every night she had spent doubting herself had turned into a stepping stone that led her here. And now, she carried not their words but her own courage. She had walked through fire, and instead of burning, she had learned how to glow. Outside, journalists and strangers still called her name, but Lenny smiled not for them, not even for the world but for herself. She thought of the opportunities ahead. Doors worth $12 million, doors she alone had unlocked. But it wasn't the money that gave her power. It was the knowledge that she had done it without the hands that tried to hold her down. That she had risen without the voices that told her she couldn't. Her heart felt lighter than it ever had. She wasn't carrying their expectations, their judgments, or their insults anymore. She was carrying only herself, and that was enough. For the first time in her life, she was not someone's disappointment, not someone's burden, not someone's afterthought. She was Lenny, whole, strong, unshaken. As she walked into the sunlight, the world seemed brighter, wider, full of endless roads. And she knew deep inside, she would never again wait for her parents' pride or anyone's approval. She had found something greater, her own miracle. And this time, she was walking into a future where no one else could define her. Only she could. Lenny lifted her head, breathed deeply, and smiled. She was no longer the girl who begged to be seen. She was the woman who chose herself, the woman who stepped into her own destiny. And with every step away from the hall, her spirit soared higher. She was free. She was ready. She was her own miracle. Family may fail you. Friends may betray you. But the moment you choose yourself, you become unstoppable. Would you have walked away like Lenny, or stayed hoping they'd change? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't just scroll. Hit subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, betrayal, and triumph. Your support means the world.